All right, so this is part 2 of the John Crosland Schools Community Collaboration. So I'm very thankful to have lots of different faces to represent the many different parts of child and family development. And you guys are extensive in everything that you offer. So we're really just going to be kind of hosting a Q&A session today where we'll ask some questions, and if anybody joins later on and has specific questions that they want to ask, they'll be able to do that towards the end. But really just kind of a relaxed opportunity for us to ask some questions that parents may have if they are just starting on this journey of trying to figure out what their child needs. All right, so I have Erin with us here today, and Marion. Oh, sorry, my lights are motion censored, so they go out. And Kelly is here with us today as well. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in if you guys are good with that. So respect everybody's time. So our first question is one that we kind of imagine you will all have lots to say about. It's a very general question, but what are some indicators that a child may need further intervention in each of your specialty areas? Kind of those first signs that, hey, maybe I should look into this further. And whoever wants to kind of jump in and go first, I don't want to put you on the spot and like call your name.
We'll let Oshia go last because we probably have the longest list.
I can start. I'm speech therapy, and there are so many different indicators to indicate a child might need speech therapy. Speech is more encompassing than you might realize. So we do like articulation, speech sound production. We do our understanding and use of language. We also look at feeding abilities and social language and cognition. So speech kind of deals with almost all facets of development. So the youngest kids we see typically tend to be for children who have feeding needs. So kids who have difficulty latching, who have difficulty, keeping down formula or milk, and have problems with vomiting, low weight gain, things like that. So if we see those initial feeding needs, those tend to be the first we see from even from birth. I've had clients that are like 8 weeks old, sometimes even younger. As we start to get a little older, then we look more into the language. So some of the biggest indicators a child may need intervention is they're not really having any words or any verbal output by like 18 months to 2 years. That's definitely a big sign. If a child lacks eye contact, connection, response to name, by around that 12 to 18 month time frame, that's also an indicator that a child would need speech therapy. And then if a child is starting to talk and you can't understand anything they say at all, so if we're 2 and less than 10% of what this child is saying, that's definitely a need. You can also take a look around to other kids. So if your child is in daycare or in a setting where they're around others and you see their peers gaining all of these skills and your child does not have them, that's where I get a lot of my referrals of parents will be like, oh, I just put my child in daycare and their kids are talking and mine is not. So looking at other child's development is also a great way to kind of see where your child is at and if services aren't needed.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't even know about like the feeding aspect of it. So that was really interesting. One of the other specialties, do you want to answer?
Sure. So physical therapy is probably the most black and white of all the services that we offer, and probably the most well-known therapeutic service. If you mention physical therapy, most people know that because they have, a family member or themselves or someone that's had an injury and gone to physical therapy. And that is a component of what we do. But of course, with children, when we're looking at pediatrics, we're looking more at development and not necessarily what we would call rehabilitation, meaning that there was a prior level of skill that has been lost. but that we're looking at habilitation, so teaching it for the first time. So the scope of PT isn't quite as broad as the strokes that, speech have and the strokes of OT, but we definitely treat and deal with a lot of different presentations. And so indicators for me that a child might need physical therapy when we're looking at things like coordination. And so that might be one of the more, fine-tuned things to look at. But if you're watching your friends' children and your children on a playground, you can quickly pick out the kids that are a little bit more clumsy or, tend to fall or have a hard time navigating a new piece of equipment, things like that. Those things tend to fall under the coordination realm. And so we're looking at coordination as a whole. We're also looking at strength. And so when we start thinking about strength, a lot of times children can have weaknesses that are related to a diagnosis, such as low tone or something even like Down syndrome or something like that that might impair their strength. However, there are also typically developing kids that are just weaker than their peers. And a lot of times that can show up in different ways. So it might be that they're, again, not able to play sports the way that their friends play sports, or they're not able to, sustain sitting at a desk. And so one of my favorite things to share with teachers is, the kid that in the first couple minutes of class is sitting upright, and 3 minutes in they're here, and 5 minutes in they're here, that we're starting to notice that there's a difficulty with maintaining positions with strength. So it can be a little bit more fine-tuned than what we think of with kind of the bigger strength things. And then finally, mobility, how do children get around their community? And so with that, we're obviously looking at things like running and walking, skipping and big movements, but we're also looking at, can they ride a bicycle? Can they ride a bicycle without training wheels? Can they ride a scooter? Can they move around and navigate their environment in the way that we would expect them to at their age? And so one thing with bikes I always like to share is, if you think of the child's age, so at the age of 3, they should be able to ride a 3-wheeled bike or a tricycle. At the age of 4, they should be able to ride a 4-wheeled bike, or that's a 2 wheels and 2 training wheels. But then at 5, we would expect them to be able to be off and riding on their own. And so really physical therapy can work on all of those areas, and it can be a really small fine-tuned thing that they're missing, all the way up to something that might be much more noticeable. One of the most common things we're seeing right now is toe walking. And so getting in our school-aged kids that are kind of popped up on their toes, and it's like, oh, well, it'll go away over time. But one of the things that we're seeing is that it really doesn't. And so one of my favorite things about being a PT is looking at people's gait, patterns in their walking. And toe walking is something that we see well into adulthood if it's not addressed, during the school age years.
Thank you.
Occupational therapy is probably the least understood by the general population of how we work with children. Because of the word occupation. Occupation in this respect does not refer to jobs, but it refers to the everyday activities that we do. So we all have different occupations, and those include taking care of ourselves, dressing ourselves, feeding ourselves, bathing ourselves. It includes participation in social and leisure activities, and it includes work. But for a child, their work is either play or their work is schoolwork. So an occupational therapist looks at, okay, why is a child not successful in any one of those areas? And we try to lay a stronger foundation for development of all the necessary skills to be successful in life. So our foundation might include sensory. How does a child respond to all the stimulation of the world around them? Some of our kids are so excited and want all the stimulation that they can get. They're the movers and the shakers. They're the ones that go fast and climb high and are crashing and want things loud and bright and love things that spin, and they just can never seem to get enough. There are things in their mouth all the time. They're chewing on their shirts, toys, everything. Their systems just are we call it dysregulated, and they just can't seem to get enough. And if they can't seem to get enough of their sensory input, then they're spending so much time seeking that they're not able to find that calm, organized place to listen and learn, and to develop the higher level skills that they need to participate in school. Another area that we look at in the sensory realm is the kids that are sensory avoiders. So for these kids, then the world is too loud, too bright, moves too fast, don't want to get on the playground because they're fearful. They don't know how to make their bodies go on the slide, or the swings are too overwhelming. And even car rides, they may get car sick because they're so sensitive to the world around them. And so we work with both of those extremes, and we have proven methods to bring a child back to the center of sensory processing and allow them to then feel comfortable in their bodies and in the world around them. So we often start with looking at the sensory needs, but on top of that, then how do we learn new skills? Do we need someone to break down a task for us into small steps, or can we figure things out on our own? We call that motor planning. The kids that you put a pencil in their hand and they're clueless. They have no idea how to hold it, how to turn the correct side of the pencil to the paper. Or then we ask them, they might know how to hold it, but we ask them to write their letters. Here, copy what you see. Well, they have no idea how to look at something and reproduce it on their own. They seem to need so much more practice. It's the parents that are saying, okay, I told you to go clean up your room. Well, the child has no idea how to initiate. It's like, well, if you told me to pick up my Legos and put them into the blue box, I might have figured out how to clean up my room. But looking at the whole job, I just didn't know where to start. So those are our kids that we say have motor planning difficulties. We might have kids that have some of the coordination deficits, but mostly affect their upper body. The poor throwing, catching, something maybe coming at them when you're throwing a ball to them, and their response is to close their eyes and turn away. They may have vision issues because they can't converge their eyes to keep their eyes on that ball that's coming towards them. So we look at a lot of vision issues with our children that are having coordination difficulties as well as handwriting difficulties. If you can't keep your eyes directed down to your page, it's going to be really hard to write a sentence across this page or to read a sentence across the page. Occupational therapy also looks at behavioral regulation. Am I able to exert self-control? Am I having a meltdown that lasts 30 minutes because my parent said no to something, or my parent might not even know why I'm having a meltdown, but I've just lost control and I can't get it together in order to stop having this meltdown. So social emotional skills, regulation skills, these are also a big part of occupational therapy. Occupational therapy also pairs with speech therapy for our feeding difficulties. We have all of our picky eaters, and every child is a picky eater to some degree, but when your child has only 5 foods in their repertoire, we start calling this a problem eater, that all they're eating is French fries, chicken nuggets, crackers, and maybe cheese. These are kids that are having sensory difficulties managing foods that feel different in their mouth, the smells. We pair with speech language therapy to say, okay, are they having any oral motor difficulties? Can they manage the food in their mouth? Sometimes that's where the problem begins. Sometimes I was a child that had a lot of of feeding difficulties, and I had reflux. And so anytime food went in, I had an unpleasant experience. And for all of us, think about those times when you've had an unpleasant experience with food. They stay with you for a long time. And so these kids, doctors may say, oh, they'll eat when they're hungry. Well, some of these kids don't. So we have to do some intense feeding therapy with some of these kids to deal with this problem eating, because we do know that poor nutrition is not good for language and learning and behavior and cognition. So those are some of the areas. Just going to look at my list here. For a school age child, just wanted to go through a school age child that might need occupational therapy is the kid that's overly active, unable to slow down, again, unable to sit still, unable to focus, follow directions, overreacts to, the child next to me touched me and now I'm having a meltdown about it. Transitions, changes in routine. These are all part of that self-regulation skills that OT works a lot with. Again, difficulties with holding a pencil, handwriting, reversals, finding it difficult to make friends. They go out on the playground and they don't know how to interact with their peers. Sometimes it's related to language, but sometimes it's related to I really don't know how to initiate a social interaction with a peer. And so OT will work on some of that. Poor self-esteem, we look at, well, why does the child have poor self-esteem? Often there's an underlying issue with like the motor planning or the sensory processing, that they know they can't do something and so they'd rather not give it a try. So occupational therapy, pretty much if a child is having trouble anywhere in life, we can work with the family to address it.
So you weren't kidding when you said it was involved a lot.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And so some of these next questions that we're going to go over, we don't necessarily need to hear from each of you because I think your question or your answers will probably be very similar. So whoever feels most comfortable, if you just want to speak up, and I'm sorry if you can hear our lovely lower school in the background heading to their lunch. Hopefully my door is blocking out that sound, but they're very excited for lunch today. So some of this next question, so it says, how is getting the rehab services, all of the different ones that you just covered, such as PT, OT, and speech therapy, going to help a child reach their goals? And what benefits will these services provide to not only child, but their family members as well? So again, I know we could probably spend extensive amount of time on this. If you could maybe just kind of pick, you think maybe the most moving or the biggest one, which I also know might be difficult. But yeah, just kind of what is the benefit? Why should a parent and a child invest their time and energy and sometimes money, oftentimes, into these services?
Sure. I think the best way to describe it is thinking of speech therapists, occupational therapists, and physical therapists that work in pediatrics as developmental experts. So that's what we know about. That's what we go to school for. And that's what all of our advanced education is in. And so when you're thinking about, if you were to want your child to learn to play the piano, you would set them up with a piano teacher that was really great at what she did. If you wanted your child to excel in soccer, you'd make sure that they were working with a coach that really was, going to instill good learning into them of how to play the sport and how to stay safe. And so that's kind of who we are for development, is that we are the coaches. We're the people that know what comes next, but we're also the people that know what foundational skills need to be there in order to attain goals. And so oftentimes what we see with children are things that we call splinter skills, where they may demonstrate some skills that are higher level, but they're missing a lot of these foundation blocks. And it's our job to go in and find where those foundation blocks are missing, because as you know, if you're stacking anything and you're missing the foundation, eventually it's going to come crumbling down. And that's what happens, is that we get these couple of splinter skills, but then we're not able to advance. And so it's our job to not only help obtain the next skill and the current skill, but also to really research and figure out where are those foundational blocks that are keeping the child from reaching those skills on their own.
I love that analogy of the coach. That's a very helpful visual that I think everybody can relate to and
Yeah.
understand.
Sure.
Does anybody else want to add to that, or we want to go ahead and take a look at the next question?
I think one of the keys, like you said in that second part, how will that help the family members? If you're working with a good therapist, you should have a good understanding as a parent of what your therapist is working on and how you can provide a bridge to working on some of the same things at home. Not that you want to become your child's therapist, but a good therapist will give you activities that you can incorporate into your daily life to not make it harder, but to give your child opportunities to develop the skills that they're needing.
We can also, provide connections to the community that you might not know about. I don't even know how many times I've had a client come in because they're a late talker and I refer them to PT and OT, and the family had no idea that they might have had motor deficits. But now this child is getting all the support to grow, and thinking about kind of long-term where we're going. I can say personally on Marion's front, I actually have sensory processing disorder. So I did not have therapy as a child, and it impacted me later in life. So now anytime I see that in a client, I'm like, go get OT, because if we don't build these skills now, it's going to make it harder to function in high school and in college and as an adult. So you really want to target them when they're younger.
Which is a nice segue into the next question, which you kind of just answered. Is there that sweet spot? And there's actually kind of follow-up questions to this one because we kind of know what the answer is, but I will definitely allow you to speak. Is there that sweet spot in age for these interventions to be most effective?
I think the sweet spot is as soon as you recognize it. So we talk a lot in therapy about parent, like mommy gut, daddy gut, just kind of what you're feeling. And if you're seeing something and it seems off, reach out. We'll do a free telephone chat with you. We'll also see a child for a 30-minute screening within the office, just to give you an idea and maybe put your mind at ease or suggest some things to work on at home. But often what I see the biggest problem with is a delay in referral. So maybe the parent says early on, I'm a little concerned about this. And the physician that only sees the child every, 6 months to a year says, oh, let's give it a little bit more time. Then it's 6 months later and the problem potentially is still there. And now we have a bigger gap that we have to close. So if I'm working to close a, developmental gap that's this big, it's a lot easier than closing a developmental gap that's this big. And so I think the sweet spot is whenever you notice that there's something that you want to work on, because it could be that you're in with us for 2 to 3 months versus 2 to 3 years if you wait longer.
So in that same line of thinking, so like you said, kind of that early intervention when you first notice obviously is preferred when those gaps may be smaller. Is there still a benefit? Like, let's say it's a high school student or that their family is kind of just noticing. Is there still a benefit to getting those services as an older child?
Yeah, there's definitely, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, there's definitely always a benefit to getting therapy. While focusing on younger can decrease that gap, you can't really be too old, especially for speech. I get a lot of clients that developed language appropriately, and now they're in like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, where things move from concrete to abstract, and they struggle in figurative language. They have difficulty with analogies, have difficulty reading text and understanding. So those aren't things you're going to see when they're younger because they're not reading yet. I even have some clients that come to me at like 17 or 18 that are now having social difficulties, and there's concerns about going to college, or some kids that I have some families that'll think maybe their child is nonverbal, and then they start to learn later that there's an option to have a device or a communication system. You can never be too old to start that. So even if your child is older, it is important to get in for services.
I think too that as you look at development and aging, recognizing that it is our first 8 years of a child's life, that we're building a foundation. And so we're working on a lot of the foundational skills in the first 8 years. After that, a lot of learning occurs through what we say the frontal cortex. So we're looking more at cognition, and therapy may switch from developmental in nature to providing more accommodations. Or we've definitely had older high schoolers, college students come in who've never gotten therapy, and they just want to understand why they feel the way they feel and why they do things the way they do them. So sometimes it's just education for that older population of, okay, this is why you do things the way you do them. These are some of the words that we've used, and just understanding how you think and how you behave and how you react is empowering and can build self-confidence. And then we can help you to come up with some of those accommodations and strategies to deal with things. So it changes through the lifespan, but I like to think we never stop learning and never stop growing.
Thank you. So our meeting is actually going to close in about 10 minutes. I know it's unbelievable that we've already been talking for as long as we have. It goes so fast. So I really just want to kind of wrap up on one of these hot topic questions. I think everybody is always talking about COVID. I'm sure we could talk about this lots and lots, but I don't want us to just randomly get cut off in our recording. So do you feel like in this current climate and everything that we've seen with the lovely word COVID, which we've all had lots of experience with, is there an increased need for these services? Or do you think that need has kind of always been there? Maybe parents are just seeing it more. Kind of what's your take on that?
There's a lot of takes on that, right? I'll start with one, and I know that Marion and Kelly will have others. Not being around peers is not just an impact. So I'm talking like quarantine, not being in school, those kinds of things. Doesn't just impact children socially, which is a huge thing that I'll let them speak to, but it impacts them developmentally and even in acquisition of motor skills. So if you take away recess and you take away PE class and you take away playing on a playground with peers and you're at home, there's only so many things to do. And even if you go for walks and you do those things, you're not getting exposed to the things that your peers are doing, and you're not getting to watch kids continue to develop and in front of you. And so one of the things we talk about sometimes with early development is that children that are in a daycare setting will often acquire skills more quickly than children that are at home. Is it bad? No, but they have someone to look at. You're not crawling around the house for your 9-month-old to go, oh, that's how I should move about, right? So if they can see their peers doing what they should do next, then they're always going to be encouraged to grow. And so from a physical standpoint, one of the things that we've seen is just by not having that peer-to-peer interaction, a lot of children have not been exposed to things to grow their gross motor skills. And so now if you're not exposed to it, because likely you and your husband or wife don't skip around the house, then your 5-year-old's not going to be skipping, right? And so we want to expose them to those things. And I think what we've seen in physical therapy and with gross motor development is lack of exposure, whether it's at a daycare age, whether it's at a school age, all the way up, that children and youth are not acquiring the skills as quickly because they haven't been around their peers.
That makes complete sense. Anybody else want to add anything in our last few minutes to that?
Definitely, we're seeing a lot of children now that are having anxiety. And some of that anxiety is because the world has changed and they don't have a frame of reference for how to deal with all those. Well, don't do this, don't do that. Well, what is it I am supposed to do? So much fear has been put into these kids. And so with this increase in anxiety, they're avoiding a lot of things that are normal child activities. The social piece, we haven't been allowing them to get together with their peers because you might get sick or you might get your peers sick. And so they don't know how to engage in a lot of the social interactions appropriately with peers. Just emotional regulation. We've been in our own homes and haven't learned how it is we're supposed to act in the communities. And we've had extra support from our parents because they've been by our side so much of the time that we haven't learned on our own how to manage the world and to behave appropriately out in the world. So we're seeing definitely an increase in children that are having mental health and emotional difficulties.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, like in the speech world, we're definitely kind of seeing similar things, a lot more social difficulties. Another thing we're seeing is, when you're home all the time, there's a lot of more increases in screen time. And screen time definitely has an impact on language development. So we are seeing more children with language delays, more of those late talkers, as kids kind of have different language models to view from. So instead of viewing language models with peers, they're viewing language models with different shows and songs and things like that, that change the way that they develop and grow their language.
The last thing I'll add real quick is you asked if there's an increase in need. I think there is an increase in need, but I think there's also been an increase in parent awareness.
Yes.
So you take children that have been at school all day, 5 days a week, and you tell the parent to be the teacher while working, and they're going to notice some things in their child about their attention, about their ability to, be on task at school, their ability to complete academic tasks that they hadn't seen before because they weren't the teacher. And now they have been for, or they were for a year and a half or 2 years, they were the teachers. And so all of a sudden they, families are much more in tune to, why can't he figure this out? I've tried teaching it. I've tried showing him, I've tried this, and he still doesn't get it. And maybe they wouldn't see that in the school setting as often because the teacher might be addressing it and teaching them different ways. And so we have seen an increase, especially in families reaching out to say, like, is this normal? Or,
Yes.
How do I work with my child? Or is it okay that he can't attend to virtual education? What does that look like? So I think that it's two things. It's an increase in parent awareness just due to increased time with the children and in a setting that the parent's not used to being involved in, and it's an increase in actual need.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's interesting to hear that align because, of course, I'm coming from the school perspective, and I can't tell you how many conversations with parents have started with, I had no idea that this was what it was like until we were home for 6 months. And so it's nice when you've got that alignment because you're like, okay, everybody's kind of experiencing this, and so we can try to address it appropriately. Again, I just want to thank you all so much for being here today, for sharing your thoughts. Child and Family Development is a wonderful organization as a whole. I appreciate each of you supporting your practice by sharing your thoughts. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you
Thanks.
for having us.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.